Right, right. We are rolling. Hey again, Leroy. Nice for you to join us. Really appreciate it. For
No problem.
this taking your time out. Such short notice to really join us with this. Just to give a background on what we're going to be going into, and just some background of this particular session. So it's going to be the title. We've titled it, poverty virus, and just how it links to crime and violence. Again, obviously, we have a distinguished guest with us. Leroy, he's going to introduce himself. I'm going to give him the opportunity to do so soon. But this is just for every single person watching. Really do try and plug in. I'm sure there will be lots of ideas rolling through your minds and probably questions that you may want to ask. So please do feel free to ask, and an answer will be given separately from this session as well. But I just want to go, before we start, I just want to give a brief introduction to myself, and then just going to go into some bits. I'm going to, Leroy, if you don't mind, I've got an excerpt here from the BBC, just to sort of try and warm us into, sort of a background about yourself. And then I'm going to let you fully take it on, and then I'm going to ask you some questions. So just a bit about myself. Guys, my name is Abba. And for you guys who don't know, I am here representing the youth advisory group. The youth advisory group for the Day of Hope campaign. And we've been working in the background, for the last few months, trying to garner some interest or build some momentum towards the Day of Hope campaign, which is the 20th anniversary, or commiserates the 20th anniversary of the tragic death of Damilola Taylor. I'm also part of Damilola Taylor Youth Board, which I have been for the past year or so, which has been really rewarding. Obviously, the pandemic has meant that I've not been able to liaise or work on some projects with some of my colleagues that I'd have liked to, but it's been great nonetheless. So we're really going to go into this. So just before I go and ask Leroy some questions, I just want to read this excerpt from the BBC News, which I found really interesting. And it reads, Leroy Logan is a former superintendent in the Metropolitan Police and was one of London's top officers until his retirement 7 years ago. A former chairman and founding member of the Black Association, Logan was involved in the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, an inquiry into the killing of Damilola Taylor. Born in 1957 to Jamaican parents, Logan was awarded an MBE by the Queen in 2001 for his role in developing anti-racist policies for the anti-racist policies for the police. So Leroy, my first question to you is, for people that may not know or have come across you, with all that I've just said, how would you introduce yourself to them?
Well, very similar to what you're already said, and thanks for the invite to be involved here. Yeah, I'm a retired superintendent, and I have been working in grassroots organizations even before I left the organization in 2013. Yeah. And one of the main charities I helped set up and continue being chair, and now I'm the patron of, is called Voyage Youth. Yeah. And that's my sort of organization that I take great pride in. And they work closely with other grassroots organizations, and we are aligned to the Hope 2020 campaign partnership. And also, I'm the author of my autobiography, Closing Ranks, My Life as a Cop. And recently, I was the key person in Small Axe episode 3, directed by Steve McQueen, called Red, White and Blue, starring John Boyega, who played me in my informative years of the 60s, 70s and 80s. Yep. And that included the first few years in the police service. So that's me.
Brilliant. You just touched on that last bit there. I just wanted to go just pique your interest, or just to draw upon your views upon how you felt when you found out about that show, and just how that all came about, if you don't mind.
Well, it came about 5 years ago, where I was approached by a consultant, a producer in the name of Helen Bart. She used to be with the BBC. I knew her when I was doing a lot of interviews then. And Helen asked me if I was interested in having my story recorded for a future project. She didn't go into any details. And then in 2016, she said my recording had gone through the sort of initial process of seeing if it's a strong enough story.
Yeah.
And then she revealed it's for Steve McQueen. So, and he had just won the Oscar, 12 Years a Slave.
Yeah.
So that was very, very humbling, very surprising, and very exciting. And as a result of that, I went and met him later that year, and we got on really well, which helped, because it was then setting in a process of really encapsulate my story to him and his other scriptwriter, Corte Newland.
Yep.
And formulating the script that went best part 2017, 2018.
Yep.
Took a couple of years, and being involved in costumes, because it was based on me and my wife and my sister and my best friend Lee John and my parents, who's passed away now. So we're trying to get it as authentic as possible.
Yeah.
Which then led on to being on the set, just to make sure, again, just to make it authentic and real.
Yeah.
And of course, it transpired that it got transmitted on BBC One last Sunday, the 29th of November. So it's been a 5-year journey.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was starting to formulate my book. I'd actually started it in 2010, but it was on and off. But while I was going through that process, I've just outlined about the Small Axe and the Red, White and Blue episode. I was formulating, really crystallizing my thoughts around my autobiography, which was published in September of this year, only a couple of months ago. And obviously it's run in concert with the BBC production. So it's really reinforced each other, and I couldn't have charted that myself. It's literally a divine intervention how it's worked out, and I'm just very thankful and very grateful.
Yeah, absolutely. In your autobiography, Leroy, I'm sure you shared a lot about your early years, your formative years, growing up, and those experiences in that regards. But obviously, so those that haven't read the book, obviously those that may not know a lot about your story in that regards, would you mind sharing some of your experiences growing up in the environment that you did, and share with us how that shaped your thinking and your mentality towards life in general?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Islington initially, and of Jamaican parents who came over in the Windrush generation. Yeah, they gave us very clear boundaries, clear discipline, no ambiguity, what was right and what was wrong. Yeah, and I was very obedient child. I tried to be as best I can. We all have our moments. And we were a small family, so it's just my sister, myself. And then while I was still in primary school age, my mother decided she was going back to Jamaica. Yep. So I was out there for a few years with my sister, and we enjoyed a total contrast in culture and the food and the weather. Yeah. It was brilliant. And I really absorbed those few years. And then I came back to London, and it was pretty difficult for me to re-establish, reconnect, because I had a very strong Jamaican accent at the time. Yeah. And felt Jamaican than English. Yeah. Yeah. I felt like I was a newbie, even though I was born in London. Absolutely. And I that's when it really dawned on me about racism and what it actually meant, because before I left for Jamaica, I was a bit young, didn't really understand those sort of things. And when I was in Jamaica, everyone looked like me, and I enjoyed just being, part of the nation. Yeah. And, but when I came back, all of a sudden, my color was a big thing. Yeah. But I had to understand in my identity what where I came from, my parents used to say, anytime you come in the house, you're back in Jamaica. So I always felt that way. And my parents cooked food connected with Jamaica. And I think that's what you find with a lot of families from different cultures and backgrounds, that they, you know, your food is your identity in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And and then obviously I continued my education, went to college in Hackney. I then went to University of East London and finished my science degree, where I then became a research scientist at the Royal Free Hospital, where I was actually born. In fact, that was the new site of the Royal Free. The original site in Islington in Liverpool Road had been converted into a gated community. So it was good just to go back to my roots, my starter. And I thought my life as a scientist was charted out until I got the calling of policing, and I joined the police in June '83.
Brilliant. We'll come back to that actual wording. I love the wording that you used there in terms of calling to policing. We'll come back to that in a bit. But you know, with this session, we're looking to really, I think, explore into the topic of poverty, explore into how that affects, you know, a range of individuals, how, you know, that affects, you know, people's mindsets, how it affects the upbringing in that regards. And even just looking into my life, Leroy, you know, just I, you know, wasn't born in the UK, was born in Nigeria, came in, you know, to the UK as a young boy, about the age of 10, and 9, 10. And, you know, had to sort of, with, you know, my family had to, you know, as you probably witnessed and probably seen, had to work our way up the social ladder in that regards. And I think for me, that really shaped a lot of things. It taught me a lot of things. It gave me a resolve in many areas. But then I've seen on the flip side how that's affected, you know, people in similar positions to myself, how they, you know, from that point in time, they've made bad decisions. They've, you know, been pressured into doing things that they may not have done if they probably had a bit more of a support, and it's really brought them into a place of regret in many ways. You know, looking into some of the poverty. I mean, I love this quote by Nelson Mandela. He says, "Poverty is not an accident. Like slavery and apartheid, it is man-made and can be removed by the actions of human beings." And then just looking into poverty, and this is not by any means a lesson for people. I think just to remind us about some things in regards to the topic. You know, we have absolute poverty, you know, income below certain income necessary for basic living standards. And then we have relative poverty. These are individuals receiving an income at a certain level. And we know, you know, in the UK, they sort of gauge that sort of poverty line with that poverty definition of people that have 60% less income than the average income level for someone of their housing level in that regards, if that makes any sense. You know, 20 years ago, 20% of 20 to 34-year-olds lived with a parent or guardian. That has now risen to 30%, affecting 3.9 million people. And now we see that the proportion of UK population in deep poverty has risen more than a third, from 5 to 7% over the last 2 decades. So we can see it's a real issue. Obviously, then we know the pandemic. We know, obviously, the economic situation now has just pushed more people further down into that area. And I feel like I'm talking a lot, you know, into the stats and stuff. I think where I want to come to now is just to, you know, sort of gauge your views and your thoughts in this area. Again, you know, more information on it. You know, poverty rates were highest among families with children and high for Black and minority and ethnic families. We can also see, Leroy, how, you know, child poverty as well is increasing. And this is a topic that's quite close to my heart. You know, the levels of children that are falling below the poverty line is increasing ever so often. Then we can see how this links into the childhood. This how it links into how they're being brought up, and it affects, you know, their thinking in many ways, shape, and form. And affects, you know, how they sort of come out of it. But my question to you, Leroy, with all that being said, is what do you think are the biggest challenges for young people growing up in poor and deprived communities? And do you think this has any links to crime and violence in any way, shape, or form?
Well, let me first say that being poor doesn't mean you've got a higher propensity to be criminally minded or commit crime. So that's the first thing, because crime has no color. Crime is crime.
Yeah.
But there's certain social, political factors that lead to it, and which you've clearly outlined.
Yeah.
It's quite clear that we, as people of color in this country, have been subject to systemic failures in education, in housing, in access to pathways to strive and not just survive.
Yeah.
And we know that 70% of minority groups live in the top 10 most deprived boroughs across the country.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, when you're born in depravity and crime-infested areas, it's a question of survival. And unfortunately, not everyone can navigate through that to work out how they become fully productive in their own rights. And fortunately, to survive, there are certain affiliations you make because of where you live, where you go to school, where you play sports, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And also there's an issue around security, because if you are living in an area where there's postcode rivalry, to then try and be secure in that sort of dynamic, it's a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
And especially when growing up in that, and your role models are people involved in that sort of postcode affiliation, those misguided loyalties.
Yeah.
And at a very young age, you get manipulated and groomed into those affiliations. That's a real tough one to extricate yourself from, because there's a security element to it, and a lot of the affiliations people get into is to be more secure, more self-worth, more significant.
Yeah.
And if they don't feel they're getting that in the home or in school, or they feel over-policed and underprotected, there's a good chance that they fall into the hands of the dysfunctional role models who's able to give them some food, some money, ask them to run errands.
Yeah.
And once they entrap that young individual, they're caught to do all sorts of things, initiation processes that can involve committing crimes on individuals and using violence. The use of violence is very closely associated with that. And of course, it can lead to strong gang affiliations and possibly running county lines, etc. So it's a tough one, and until we get clear reconnection, because at the moment, I think the police service it has a disconnect with communities, especially urban communities, because through austerity over the last 10 years, community police officers have been set back significantly. Just in the Met alone, they lost about 6,000 officers, and most of them were your safer neighborhood teams and your safer schools officers. So when you withdraw those officers, you leave a void.
Absolutely.
And that void has been filled with dysfunctional role models. And then on top of that, families, even if they've got a job, they may have to have 2-3 jobs to survive.
Yeah.
They might not have as much contact time with the children.
Yeah.
And they might detect that their child has been caught up in those dysfunctional role models, and they don't have a means by which they can divert them. They can't say, all right, why don't you go to that youth club, or police are doing an early intervention and prevention program, because those officers are no longer there. And that void's been left. And for the last 5 to 7 years, there's been that unbalance.
Yeah.
And now they're trying to rebalance.
Yeah.
But there's a critical mass of young people who've grown up in the lack of engagement, and they've engaged with the dysfunctional role model. Plus, there's been an exponential growth in exclusions.
Yeah.
And when you exclude a child, and they're now the responsibility of the local authority with alternative provisions, and they're left to their own devices, they don't have anything to engage them, and they're out the school network, you might as well write the date when they're going into the prison service.
Yeah.
And that's what we've seen. So there's been an erosion of public services. There's been a disconnect. And of course, there has been the outcome of youngsters slipping through the net, being caught up in the dysfunctional role model net, and being sucked into a life of crime and violence.
Yeah, absolutely. That was really well covered, Leroy. I think it touched on a lot of key points I would like to come back to further down this conversation. But just going back, and I mentioned, when you mentioned you had that calling to be, a police officer and calling to go into that sort of environment. And I'm just going to extrapolate another excerpt from the BBC here, which I like to go into. And here, I think they quoted you saying, you saying, I thought, no way am I going to leave the world of science and go against my father. But the calling kept nagging at me. All my nearest and dearest, my wife, my friends, everyone was saying, why are you doing this? And then you added, questioning your sanity. You questioned your sanity for a number of years in that regards. And then you said, it's sort of, you asked yourself this question: why have I left the comfortable world of science in a great hospital, the royal free, to go and work in a very militaristic type of culture, which had the casual racism and, quite a hostile environment for a Black person? Just reading this really piqued my interest, Leroy. I was quite intrigued by it. And, and for me, just even looking at your life story, looking at how far you've come, just looking at just what you had to go through. To me, you're a very inspirational person. I'm quite excited. I've not watched it yet, the BBC documentary or docuseries or show, Small Acts. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm quite intrigued and I'm looking forward to that in that regards. But your background, as a successful Black officer, has been well documented in that regards. I find your song quite inspirational in that sense. But do you think that your career and success story has been a source of inspiration to other, young Black men or other individuals that have had a similar sort of story to yourself, who may be associated to crime and violence? And if not, why do you think it hasn't? So do you think that you've had a good source, been a good source of inspiration, or do you think maybe not? Maybe some people look at you and think, oh, he's just a cop.
Okay. Fortunately, I felt that I was able to show my worth in terms of what I do as a cop, as I made it clear that when I joined the police service, I was a Black man who happened to be a cop. Because here I am, I'm retired, I'm still a Black man. So that meant I went into the organization to integrate with my beliefs and values. And I wasn't going to assimilate and adopt their norms and cultural values. And so it gave me an opportunity to have a real external focus throughout the whole time. And work with people without looking down on them and relating to them because of my shared and common experience, especially with the target group of young Black men who are disengaged. And in a lot of ways that empowered me to be a part of the Black Police Association and how we set that up to not only be self-serving in improving in the work environment of Black personnel, but also to improve the service delivery to the Black community. So that gave me, again, an opportunity to be building bridges, not barriers. And from that, I helped set up the BPA Charitable Trust a few years after our official launch in '94, and the BPA Charitable Trust was set up in '98. And from that, we saw the need to be externally focused explicitly, and we set up our youth leadership program as it was
Yeah.
then in 2000. And that was in response to an increase in knife crime and gun crime in those late 90s,
Yeah.
early O's. And it's still going now,
Absolutely.
almost 20 years later. And it's now called Void Youth.
Okay.
And our youth leadership program, which is based at year 9.
Yeah.
It's a BTEC level 2,
It's really good.
where they know their rights, responsibilities, understand how they navigate through the system
Yeah.
to be successful, to strive, not just survive,
Yeah.
and to change their environment and not become a product of it, primarily through positive peer-to-peer mentoring and
Yeah.
choosing their friends wisely, etc.
Yeah.
So just that piece of work
Mm.
gave me a clarity of why I was there in the organization, to be a role model,
Yeah.
to assist in young people knowing why police do certain things,
Yeah.
and how they deal with encounters such as stop and search, which is a very traumatic experience, especially if multiple stop and searches in
Yeah.
short period of time. And I've seen how our young people in Voyage are always saying every year when I do the police model of the program, and I say to them, you know, what's your impression of police? And they invariably say they're over policed and underprotected. They've got quite toxic views of police, especially in the last 10 years around the disconnect between police and young people.
Yeah.
And they give a great sense that they seem to be influenced by their peers than their parents because of social media.
Yeah.
And they feel that no one really understands them. So that's why the Voyage program is, for me, an opportunity to understand how we, in positions of authority, whether you're a police officer, a teacher, firefighter, whatever, you can give a sense of hope and aspirations, because if they see it, they can be it, in essence. And I think we also showed an explicit form of understanding the community through operational means. And one of the most high profile way we showed that was when I was asked to bring in a cadre of black officers to assist with the house-to-house inquiries of the Damilola Taylor murder investigation.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was a dilemma for me, because I realized when I was called, I voluntarily attended the memorial service of Damilola within a week or so of his death, only to find out there's a family connection, because my wife is a cousin to Richard.
Wow.
So there was that personal connection, which I had to keep on the down low.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I didn't want it to interfere with the investigation, because I was quite high profile in those days in terms of being the chair of the Black Police Association. Yeah. And then obviously they asked me to bring in a cadre of officers, which I said I would do. Yeah. And within choosing them, briefing them and deploying them, a few weeks later, or a couple of weeks later, even a few days later actually, they were able to go into homes which white officers couldn't even enter, and get information. Yeah. Their shared and common experience to reassure people that their information would be guarded and their identity protected, which led to the identification of witnesses and suspects, and eventually led to the conviction of the Preddy brothers. But the thing was to show how we as operational officers with that shared and common experience with the community could get an effective outcome in that investigation. And that was a strong pull for some people, because I know some young people say to me, because of what you did in Damilola or with the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, it inspired them, and it gave them a sense, well, if he can do it, I can do it. Yeah. So the essence of role models, I think, is the key for me as an officer, and how to support young people to achieve their true potential.
Amazing. Thank you for that, Leroy. I think even given the insight into how involved you were in regards to the Damilola Taylor cases and Stephen Lawrence cases, I know that really was over the course of the last few years and however long it took to bring those individuals into account and bring them into a place where, the chapter could be closed, if you could say that, in regards to the murderers of Damilola Taylor. I know that really inspired a lot of people. So it's quite interesting that you also touched upon some potential solutions in that regards, and some of the things you've been doing in the background, some of the organization you're working with, and some of the organization that you head up in that instance. What would you say are measures that are most effective in tackling poverty and violence, for many young people across the country, in that regards? Just to touch on a few that some people may have touted, some say, for example, allowing families to have an affordable, accessible, tailored childcare available to take care or look after their children. With single parents households, you don't have partners or families to have probably free childcare and support when probably parents are working in that instance. And then also, I think the question or the topic of youth clubs as well, that has been explored obviously in many ways over the last few years. But one in particular that's been spoken about is the civil society approach. So to have, for example, collective think tanks, come together and sort of, create policies that help support these communities that have had these challenges of poverty and violence and things of that nature. But up to yourself, I mean, you've been involved, in this for many, many years. What measures do you think are most effective when it comes to tackling such issues?
When I was a superintendent in Hackney, and I handpicked my Safer Neighbourhood teams, and they were ring-fenced to a specific ward.
Yeah.
And I had 1 sergeant, 2 constables, and 3 police community support officers. And that model, I think, needs to be brought back, because not only was it a reassuring, sustainable connection with the community, in particular with young people, it gave an opportunity to detect problems at an earlier stage. If there was any feuds between youngsters, or there was any families that was suffering from poverty, or we work with the local authority if there's a problem with that family in terms of even paying the rent, just to make sure that none of the youngsters get caught up in the cycle that they need to go out and commit crimes, or get sucked into a certain group of people that can groom them into crimes. And so that is clear that citizens focus process is very critical, because it actually is based on a 200-year-old idea. Because when they set up the Met Police in 1829, Sir Robert Peel, the Home Secretary at the time, said something very profound, that the police are the public and the public are the police. So the police can't really function without the public being in cooperation. And that includes all parts of the public, regardless of their background or culture. And so that's why I was able to show how our Safer Neighbourhood teams, our citizen focus officers, were extremely able to bring in more intelligence about, not to criminalize anyone, but get information to support people, get a holistic view of where the problems were, and to do the problem solving, whether it's through early intervention or prevention programs, working with grassroots organizations, other charities. Now, again, if they got that shared and common experience with the community, they could be an interface. And I used to have a mobile intervention team, which basically was an anti-gang process, but I didn't want to use the word gang. And secondly, I wanted to ensure that my officers were the last phase to go in to deal with whatever the problem is. I used to bring detached workers, youth workers, other grassroots organizations that we collaborated with. just to say, well, listen, if there is a problem, how can we have a gradual deployment of assets? But if the problem was that acute, I may have to bring in officers of various specialisms. And a case in point was in Hackney, there's an estate called Holly Street Estate, and they were like the drugs capital of North London. People from all over North London came to buy even drugs, and the average age was about 15, 16. Wow. And the elders got these youngsters into a well-drilled team, to sell crack cocaine, and these youngsters felt invincible. We'd stopped them, and they had about £5,000-6,000 in their pocket, and this was in 2006, 2007. Wow. And so we had to work with the community, with the local authority, and we had a sustained surveillance operation from end to end. It took about 6 months, and we would even DNA database analysis of how to connect them with the drugs coming in, being distributed, and obviously the proceeds, and we confiscated that, and we got a whole network, but we couldn't have done that on our own. We could only do that with the community. And fortunately, it really broke the back of that gang. They never really went back, because you know what it's like. You take out some, and the void is filled. So that's why we have to have the early intervention prevention programs to stop any youngsters thinking they're going to fill that void. And then while the ones that were in prison, we didn't leave them to their own devices. We had an enhanced rehabilitation process, so that when they came back out, they didn't go back to the same friends, location, and same type of behavior. So it really broke that cycle for a long time. And my charity Void Youth, we're still based in Hackney. And I'm proud to say Holly Street Gang is no longer the force they were. There might be remnants of them, but they're nothing like the force they were. I mean, they terrorized that part of Hackney down Kingsland Road. And, some notable people live in that area, like Diane Abba MP, and she'll be going into Parliament and seeing youths selling crack cocaine in abundance, and no one was there. And I got in there, heard about it, and I dealt with it, but not at the expense of the community. I knew I couldn't stop and search my way at the problem or arrest my way at the problem. I had to utilize proper analysis, identify the risks, deal with that gang, but make sure I have the intervention and prevention programs to help young people, especially if they're suffering from adverse childhood experiences or toxic stress or wider community stress. All of these things had to be taken into account to make sure we weren't talking about them 10 years later or 15 years later. So I'm really pleased that 15 years later, they're no longer the force they were.
Sounds like a lot of strong measures put into place there, Leroy. Love it. I think
it has to be strong, but it has to be sustainable. And that's the thing. Sustainability is the key, because you can just think, move on into the next problem, but you have to leave that sort of resilience in the community. So, because communities actually police themselves. If they believe that the police are there for them and makes them feel safe, they actually police themselves. And they'll do that in various ways. They will make a statement, they will go on an ID parade, they will go to court and say, yes, that person did that. But if you don't reassure them and make them feel safe, they won't do that. And that's one of the problems with policing today, that disconnect and that firefighting type approach to policing. People are thinking, well, you're not there for me. Other than when there's been a stabbing or shooting, we see loads of police tape and officers patrolling around, but then you move on to the next one. And then we're left to our own devices. And if you can't keep me safe or my nearest and dearest, and then you want me to do what? Make a statement, go to ID parade, go to court, and then what? And then how are you going to protect me? I'm not condoning violence. I'm not condoning people not cooperating. But you just got to think, how am I going to survive? Unless you're going to relocate me, and then that's another can of worms.
Absolutely. I could speak to you all day about solutions and just my thoughts and my experiences in those areas, Leroy. But thank you for that. I think just coming home in terms of this discussion, and as you're well aware, obviously this whole session is part of the 2020 campaign, on the build up to the Day of Hope, which we have on the 7th of December on Monday. For those of you watching now, make sure you plug in to that day. It's going to be a great discussion as well with a wonderful panel that we have on that day. But in fact, this campaign has been set up to bring hope, if we can use that word effectively. It's been established to sort of really use the story of Damilola Taylor as one that is positive instead of looking at the tragedy of it in that regards. And just for yourself then, Leroy, what would you say hope means to you? How would you like to showcase that in your work and in what you're currently doing?
Yeah, hope for me is having an opportunity to see a vision. They say people perish where there's no vision.
Yeah.
People need to have a vision. They need to have a picture in their mind of where they can be going. And invariably, it's a positive vision. Some people have negative ones, unfortunately, and you try and help them with that. But, if someone is given opportunities and a sense of hope to say that this is what I want to do, and it's not a question of just feeding them fish. You have to give them means by which they can fish and be sustainable. Because most people want to have reasonable, comfortable lives where they're self-sustained. One of the biggest form of crime prevention is upward mobility. If you give people an education, and they have a profession, and then they can go on to take care of their families, they ain't got time to be doing other things, selling drugs and getting involved in old feuds. They've moved on. And you keep people in poverty, and they feel impoverished, and the state's against them, and they have no options, and then they have no opportunities, and their life choices are reduced. For example, the gangs matrix that was brought in 2013. I'm telling you, if I was still in the Met when they brought that in, I'll be kicking up a stink. I mean, that annoys me, because it's basically institutional racism by algorithm. Because they've overlaid the algorithm on top of the flawed criminal intelligence system. And so it brings out false positives. And even though it's there to assess risk under a red, amber, and green process, people get criminalized even if they're not involved in gangs. It's only because they may live in that area, or they got relatives who might be involved in gangs, or they have committed certain offenses in the presence of these people. So if someone's got a bit of a dispute with their girlfriend and they damage their door or smash their window or whatever it is, I'm not condoning violence, but this is what happened. It's not a question of that violence has nothing to do with gangs. It's the fact that that individual is associated with certain other people, and it's a criminal act. So they're now in it. And so they can be on the matrix, especially on 0 level, before they're going to the green, first tier, as it were, to the matrix, without even knowing it. Another way they can, again, get into that problem without even knowing it is you go into an employment center, and you say, well, listen, I can't, they offer you a job in E7 or E8, and you live in E17, and you say, listen, I can't go down those ends because that is risky for me. Now, that computer analyst behind that desk in that employment agency will say, well, that person is showing gang tendencies. Because they know that, these issues. Well, that person just been streetwise. It's not a question of that they're in gangs. Now, they could be on the indices of the matrix. It's only when they get arrested, may say, they've been in a fight or something, and they see you know, they might have been fighting with someone they've known for years, but
Yeah.
it's just an old feud or something,
Yeah.
nothing to do with gangs.
Yeah.
They then have it, see on their case file is on the matrix. Where did that come from? They didn't even know they were anywhere like
matrix.
that.
Yeah.
And I know so many cases of that because I was doing anti-gang work here in East London for a number of years with a charity called Spark to Life. And it was clear that some people shouldn't be on that matrix.
Yeah.
And I was dealing with over 20 officers and only one officer out of all the clients I was dealing with, over 100 clients, only one officer said, by the way, I don't think this person should be on the matrix. Because those officers felt, well, the algorithm can't be wrong. But they can be wrong because it's on a flawed system.
It's a flawed system, yeah.
And you know, we've seen so many other systemic failures. But I just like to think that we can give back to young people, collaborating in a way that helps those young people to say, listen, I know how to navigate through this, because people who look like me and have that shared and common experience can give me time and opportunities for not only keeping me off, you know, the radar of certain people through early intervention prevention programs. They give me a sense of hope in how I then get the right choices, make the right choices, and more importantly, follow their education process to the end, and then hopefully get that sense of, well, I know where I'm going. Because as I said in my first opening, people will perish if they don't have a vision.
Yeah.
If you don't have a sight of where you're going, you won't have hope.
Yeah.
You won't have a sense of worth. You might not even have a sense of identity. And identity is so important today.
Yeah.
You know, because that's where you get it through social media and other interactions.
Yeah.
You need to know who you are and where you feel you're playing to your strengths.
Yeah.
And I would like to think hope is playing to your strengths where you know you can stand on your own 2 feet and be, you know, a person that you are comfortable with. You know, you have to be comfortable in your own skin. And if there's anything I would like to see in this collaboration, a lot of young people, regardless of their background, ethnicity, their culture, whatever, let them feel comfortable in their own skin, feel safe in their own skin. Yeah. And I'll close by saying this. You know, there's too many injustices and inequalities in society, but I don't want my grandchildren to suffer those same inequalities and injustices like my children's generation, my generation, or my parents' generation. Yeah. I want them to don't be, you know, I don't want to be subject to all of these things. Yeah. And I just hope, you know, we as a community work towards building those collaborations. And I know Hope 2020 will do that. And because we know the problem. So as my parents used to say, who feels it knows it. Yeah. We feel it. We know it. Yeah. We've got to do something about it.
Absolutely. Wish we had more time to go through your life story, Leroy. I mean, I was very intrigued with some of the things you mentioned of the Matrix, and I'll certainly be doing my own research more in regards to what that is and how that feeds into our system. My final question for you, just in a few sentences, what piece of advice would you give to your 18-year-old self, and one that you believe that young people watching this interview can learn from?
My 18-year-old self, well, make sure you choose the right partner. Because I was 19 and I chose my wife, Gretel. And she has been alongside me. In fact, a lot of people say she chose me. No, I chose her. So be mindful of the right person, your right partner chooses you. And really, it's about understanding teamwork and compromising, and ensure that, you know, you're there to give back. I would love to have done a lot more mentoring at that age. I didn't really understand how, there was no framework in which I could be mentoring at a younger age. And the reason why I say that, because I see it in our Voids program, our young people who've gone through our leadership program at 14, 15, at year 9, and they're giving back by 16, 17. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that.
It's all right.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so, you know, I love to have been a mentor at that age because I've seen it in young people in the Voyage program. They're giving back at 17 and 18, and they get so much fulfillment out of that. So my 18-year-old self would say, I want to give back at an early stage. I want to be a mentor at an early stage because I've got a lot of the answers. And that's why I know a lot of the answers we're dealing with in our streets, the young people have got the answers. We got to give them a platform to be able to speak. And, you know, I just hope that continues.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. I think in that regards then, with your organization, Leroy, you have, I'm sure, you know, there's a lot of opportunities for people to get involved in that regards and give back in that essence. So for those that are watching this interview, what information would you give them? How can they get involved? How can they help? How can they support the work that you're doing?
Well, especially since the Small Acts show on Sunday called Red, White and Blue, I made an announcement that I want to be doing some work around the impact of stop and search on people and the trauma it inflicts. So it's called Capturing Voices. So if you have any sort of problems that you can share with us on video footage or audio or whatever, please send it to us. We've already got people sending them forward onto my website. It's LL, which is my initials, Leroy Logan. So it's ll@leroylogan.com. Please send your information. I'm doing that work in partnership with Westminster University. So I'd really like to think you can work with us on that. Trust me, I'm not saying I'm going to solve the problem, but I'm looking at it from an academic point of view. The other thing that I'm doing is through the Small Acts program, through the show. I'm now doing some educational programs and going into hopefully primary schools. As I said, I've already been in secondary schools with Voyage. I want to go into primary schools through Small Acts. And I would like to think that, again, we'll build those conversations. You know, with Black Lives Matter and the issues around George Floyd, I'd really want to see, you know, the conversation moving on and people not denying that institutional racism is there. And I want people to understand that, you know, we need to do this together and do for self. And I think we in the Black community have to step up and really work to make our streets safer, make our streets more productive. And you know, COVID has shown that sense of isolation. Let's bring back communities. Let's bring back that need to the village mentality, you know, because it's not just one person that grows a child, it's a whole village. Let's bring that back. And I would like to think that I'm still going to be current on that. And of course, Voyage Youth, the jewel in the crown of my career. I just hope that anyone wants to do some work with us and collaborate with us, especially through Hope 2020, we're there. So we look forward to the future.
Lovely, Leroy. Thank you so much for that. Just as a bonus question, why Aguna? Why not Chelsea?
Because I grew up in Highbury and I went to Highbury Grove School. And if you went to Highbury Grove School, it was a boys' school in those days. It's co-ed now. If you supported any other team than Arsenal, get ready to fight. And my pain threshold was too low. And I wasn't going to be fighting for a football team. That's the only thing I've acquiesced in my life is my football team. Yeah. And in those days, you know, it was easier just to say I'm an Arsenal fan, and that happened in the '60s. And you know, you shouldn't change your football teams. You know, even when they're playing rubbish like now. But, you know, yeah, it is what it is. But no, I'm a Gooner. Proud Gooner. We've had some good times. Hopefully it can get better. And, you know, it's something that I still have connections with. I still have family and friends and relatives in the area. And, as I'm talking about my book and the Small Acts and everything, you know, I'm getting closer to Islington every day. So I can't shake it. So you can't change these things so late in your life. You know what I mean?
We hope Arsenal bring you some joy this year. If
Yeah,
not,
one day.
you've got your book.
I would like to think before my time is up. We bring back the Premiership. But anyway, we'll see.
Hopefully not soon.
Yeah. I'm sure. It's definitely not going to be this season. That's for sure.
Definitely not this season. This is one from Gary. Actually, this is a last bonus question.
Yeah.
He said, now that John Boyega's played in a TV show, how about Morgan Freeman for the movie?
Hey, I don't mind that.
He's about your age range.
I know he's saying to me count my beard. Yeah, I know. He's like, yeah, it's all right. No, I don't mind he plays me. I'm so chuffed that John Boyega wanted to play me, and Steve McQueen wanted to pick up my story. Yeah. It's beyond my wildest dreams. I'm still trying to pinch myself. Did this all happen? Yeah. But the good thing is that how we take it forward. Got to make sure we're supporting Hope 2020. Yeah. Doing my work. Through Voyage, through Team LL, and what we're trying to do with academic research, and then obviously I want to make sure the book is a success, and that's really picked up, and it's going abroad now. I would like to think that it will spur me into a second book, and you never know, there might be some political advancements, for higher office. We'll see. Like everything in life, you want to have options, and I'm glad I got options.
Brilliant, Logan. Egging you on for that second book and looking forward to it. But just come to a close now. Thank you for your time again, Leroy. I really appreciate it. Again, for those of you watching this, just hope that you're able to join with the other sessions as well. Or not with the panel on the 7th. On the Monday, we're going to have fantastic guests there. We have Gina Martin. We have Ben Hurst, to name a few others as well. I'm going to be on the panel as well. So for those of you joining in, enjoy. And I'm sure, Leroy, I'm looking forward to having you on and more interactions in the future. Once again, thank you for your time, and we will speak very soon. Take care, guys.
All right.
Have a good one.